No Democrat has done what we're seeking to do, and that is win a statewide election in Texas in the 21st century. So there is no roadmap. There is no blueprint, and there is no cheat code. So for everybody that thinks they got it, just watch and I'll give it to you.
Happy New Year! I'm Jesse Fox Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas, who you heard up top during her announcement last month that she is running for Senate. She's one of two high-profile Democrats in that race so far. The other is Texas State Representative James Tallarico, and it is just one of many interesting elections to watch across the South this year. That's why we're going to kick off 2026 with a look at some of the key electoral battlegrounds in our states as we head toward the November elections. And later in the episode, in our arts and culture segment, we're going to mark the start of Carnival season leading up to Mardi Gras, but maybe not where you'd expect. Okay, on to the elections. And remember, for more information on all of this, you can find links to news and data sources in the show notes. As we've discussed here plenty of times, the South remains dominated by far-right conservative interest groups at both the state and federal levels. But the sturdiness of that dominance varies from state to state, and several political races this year will test it. Let's start in Texas, the site of last year's dramatic and controversial congressional redistricting fight. Democrats have not won a statewide office there in nearly 30 years, but the state party has dedicated itself this year to contesting every office on the ballot, the first time in modern history that either party has managed to field a full slate of Texas candidates. The most watched races will no doubt be governor and senator, both of which feature Republican incumbents seeking re-election. Texas has no term limits for governor, and incumbent Greg Abbott is seeking a fourth four-year term, which would make him the longest-serving governor in Texas history. Several candidates have emerged on the Democratic side, but the one garnering the most attention is State Representative Gina Hinojosa. She's an attorney who comes from Brownsville, the southernmost point in Texas, and grew up in a political family. Her father, Gilberto Hinojosa, is also an attorney and served as chair of the state Democratic Party from 2012 until 2025. Hinojosa now lives in and represents part of the Austin metro area. After serving a term on the Austin School Board, she was elected to the legislature in 2016. She fought against Abbott's school voucher program, which the Republican-dominated legislature passed last year, and is making education a primary focus of her gubernatorial campaign. If she's the nominee, Hinojosa will face the daunting fact that no Democrat has won more than 45% of the vote in a Texas governor's race since 1994. In the state's senatorial race this year, there are interesting primaries on both sides of the ballot. Republican incumbent Senator John Cornyn is seeking a fifth term, but he's facing a primary challenge from the controversial and grandstanding state attorney general, Ken Paxton. Although Cornyn is a staunch conservative, Paxton is running to his right, asserting that the incumbent is insufficiently Trumpian. Paxton has a strong base of support, and recent polls show him either slightly ahead of Cornyn or running neck and neck with him. Complicating the picture is the third Republican candidate, Congressman Wesley Hunt of Houston, who's polling around 20%. If none of the three takes more than 50% in the March primary, which seems likely, the top two will go on to a runoff in May. The Democratic primary pits two of the party's rising stars against each other. One is Jasmine Crockett, an attorney and former public defender who served one term in the Texas House of Representatives before being elected to Congress in 2022, representing part of Dallas. Despite her short tenure, she has made waves as a sharp-tongued critic of the Republican leadership of the House and the Trump administration. She was given a high-profile speaking slot at the 2024 Democratic National Convention. She's up against Texas State Representative James Tallarico, a former public school teacher who's been in the state legislature since 2018. He's also turned himself into a viral social media star with impassioned and eloquent speeches on the state House floor. A self-described deeply religious Christian, he has assailed Christian nationalism and went on the Joe Rogan podcast to talk about his faith. Although both Crockett and Tallarico have taken generally progressive positions on most major issues, one that could differentiate them in the March primary is support for Israel. Tallarico has been critical of the Netanyahu government and has said it is committing war crimes in Gaza. He's also a critic of the pro-Israel lobbying group AIPAC. Crockett has been more supportive of Israel, although she's pushed back against criticism from the left for her stances, saying, quote, "I don't necessarily love the Netanyahu government." Since we heard a little from Crockett at the start of the episode, here's a snippet from Tallarico's campaign announcement in September.
Trans people aren't taking away our health care. Muslims aren't defunding our schools. Immigrants aren't cutting taxes for themselves and their rich friends. It's the billionaires and their puppet politicians. The culture wars are a smokescreen.
Another statewide race in Texas worth watching features one of our former guests here on Headlights. State Senator Sarah Eckert, who we featured in episode 25, announced last month that she's running for state comptroller. She initially announced a run for one of the recently redrawn congressional districts, but then shifted to the race for comptroller, the office that manages the state's finances. Moving eastward, there's a fascinating race shaping up for governor of Alabama. It's a long shot for any Democrat to win it. The state's last Democratic governor was Don Siegelman, who was elected in 1998 and served just one term. But the leading Democratic contender this year is also one of only two Democrats who's won statewide office in Alabama this century. Former Senator Doug Jones, who served a partial term from 2017 to 2020. Jones had a storied career as a federal prosecutor, which included convicting two Ku Klux Klan members for the 1963 Birmingham church bombing. Of course, when he ran for Senate in 2017, he had the advantage of running against former Alabama Supreme Court Justice Roy Moore, whose campaign was crippled by multiple allegations of sexual assault and harassment of teenage girls. Assuming Jones wins the Democratic nomination for governor this year, the candidate he will most likely face is Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville, who easily beat Jones in his 2020 run for re-election to the Senate. Tuberville, a legendary football coach at Auburn University, took 60% of the vote in that race, to 40% for Jones. Although Tuberville hasn't exactly distinguished himself in the Senate, that 20-point gap is an awful lot for Jones to make up. Still, he's a serious candidate, and his presence on the ballot could help other Democrats in the state. Tuberville's run for governor also means his Senate seat will be open. It has attracted a brace of candidates, including, on the Republican side, State Attorney General Steve Marshall, Congressman Barry Moore, and former Navy SEAL Jared Hudson. Declared Democrats running include business owner and police reform activist Dakari Lariat and business owner and former Republican Kyle Sweetser. More likely to be competitive are some high-profile races next door in Georgia. 2026 is going to be another test of Peach State politics. After narrowly voting for Joe Biden in 2020, the state narrowly swung back to Trump in 2024. Now Senator Jon Ossoff, who also narrowly won in 2020, is up for re-election. His fellow Georgia Democrat, Senator Raphael Warnock, won his own re-election bid in 2022, but that was against former college football star Herschel Walker, whose campaign was beset with controversies. It's not yet clear who Ossoff will face. There are three serious contenders on the Republican side. Two current Georgia congressmen, Mike Collins and Buddy Carter, and yet another football coach, Derek Dooley. And there's an open race for governor, with current Governor Brian Kemp term limited. The field of candidates to succeed him includes two Republicans who have clashed with Trump, or former Republican in one case. They are Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan. Raffensperger, who famously stood up to Trump's pressure campaign to find more votes for him after the 2020 election, is running in the Republican primary against current Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones and State Attorney General Chris Carr. Raffensperger has largely avoided criticizing Trump since the fallout of the 2020 election, and has promised to work with him if elected. But Trump being Trump, it's no surprise that he has endorsed Jones, who has comfortable leads in early polls over both Raffensperger and Carr. Duncan, meanwhile, has left the Republican Party altogether in his unhappiness with Trump, and is now seeking the Democratic nomination for governor. That stirred up a certain amount of consternation among Georgia Democrats loath to back a guy who until recently treated them as enemies. Of course, Duncan's pitch is that he can win over independents and moderates who are likewise sick of MAGA politics. But he'll have to sell that in a primary field that also includes former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms and former DeKalb County Chief Executive Michael Thurmond. early primary polls show bottoms at the top of the field. Democrats have some reasons for optimism heading into the election. They performed well in a handful of Georgia races in 2025, winning 2 statewide seats on the State Public Service Commission and flipping a state house seat and the mayor's office in an Atlanta suburb. But off-year turnouts are low, which makes them unreliable predictors for higher-profile races like this fall's. There are also gubernatorial and Senate races in Tennessee, but at the moment there's no reason to think that they'll be particularly competitive. Senator Marsha Blackburn, who was just reelected in 2024 with 63% of the vote, is the leading Republican candidate for governor. There are a handful of declared Democratic candidates, but none with statewide name recognition. Republican Senator Bill Hagerty is up for re-election and, at the moment, faces no significant opposition from either Republican or Democratic challengers. But there is at least one really interesting race in Tennessee, which we talked about a little bit last month when Corbin Trent was on the podcast. In Memphis, in the state's only Democratic-held congressional seat, incumbent Congressman Steve Cohen is facing a primary challenge from young state Representative Justin Pearson. Cohen's been in public office since 1982. He served in the state Senate for 24 years before being elected to Congress in 2006. He will turn 77 this year. Pearson was one of the 2 black state representatives expelled from the legislature in 2023 after staging a brief protest on the floor of the state house. He was quickly reappointed and then reelected to his seat, and the episode turned him and fellow state representatives Justin Jones and Gloria Johnson into national political figures. His challenge to Cohen is among the most notable face-offs this year between old guard Democrats and younger progressives. Pearson's being supported by the Justice Democrats group, which helped elect progressive members of Congress, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and also by young Democratic activist David Hogg, who's committed $1 million to support Pearson. So those are some of the big races to watch across the South this year. There's plenty of others that will be interesting in various ways, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of them as the election cycles move along. There's also the possibility of further monkeying with congressional district maps, especially if the U.S. Supreme Court further erodes the protections of the Voting Rights Act. We will be tracking that as well, of course. Epiphany is this week, January 6th on the Christian feast day calendar, also known as Twelfth Night or the 12th day of Christmas. It marks the traditional end of the Christmas season, and more importantly, for our purposes, the start of Carnival season. The array of parties, parades, and events leading up to Mardi Gras and the beginning of Lent is, of course, most associated in the United States with New Orleans. The heavily Catholic Crescent City has turned Mardi Gras into a civic and cultural institution and a core part of its identity. But while New Orleans has marked Mardi Gras in various ways ever since its founding in 1718, it can't claim to have originated it in North America. That honor goes to Mobile, Alabama, about 150 miles east of New Orleans along the Gulf Coast. And people in Mobile are pretty proprietary about it. As the Visit Mobile website announces in a big, bold headline, Mobile is the birthplace of America's original Mardi Gras. The festival was first celebrated in the city in 1703, 15 years before New Orleans was even founded. Over the centuries, it has accrued its own traditions and festivities, which include parades and costumed balls. Mobile's weeks of celebrations draw plenty of tourists, but they're a bit less raucous and more family-friendly than the bacchanalias associated with the biggest parades in New Orleans. Though, to be fair, many of the New Orleans festivities in the weeks ahead of Mardi Gras are likewise community and family-oriented. Anyway, things will be heating up in Mobile in the coming weeks, leading up to Mardi Gras Day on February 17th. You can find more information in our show notes. And that wraps up our first episode of 2026. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit enterprise, and you can find information about supporting us on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. You can also reach out to me directly at jmayshark@theprogressivesouth.org. Thanks to our friends in Bark for our theme music, and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. I wish everyone the best for 2026. Talk to you next time.